we're talking about phase 2 of our facilities proposal. You might be asking yourself, what's phase 1? What is phase 1? Well, phase 1 already began this past spring with the construction plans that were put together for Castle and Richardson Elementary School. We had some seed money that we had because of the sale a couple years ago of Valley Crossing Elementary School. That was a school that we owned jointly in Woodbury. It was inside of South Washington County, but 3 school districts owned that building. It was Stillwater Public Schools, our district, and South Wash. And it was a 10-year collaboration where we ran a school jointly together for 10 years. A couple years ago, we decided as a threesome, as 3 districts, to discontinue that collaboration and sell the building directly to South Washington School District because it's in their district property. And when we did that, we received our share of the profits from that building. So Stillwater, South Washington County paid Stillwater and our district our share of the buildings, and then that money has been sitting in a fund that can only be used for facilities purposes, for capital improvements or facilities. And so we decided that with that first pot of money, we were going to invest in renovations of a couple of our buildings. So those 2 have already begun, Castle and Richardson Elementary. And those of you who are, we had some Castle parents. Did we also have Richardson? Yes, I thought we did. We have Castle and Richardson. Your schools are under construction, and it's a wonderful project and an uncomfortable project because it's really big renovations happening. So we'll talk a little bit more about those in a few minutes. I'm going to move this over just a moment. Okay. So I always like to begin every presentation with a little look at what our district encompasses. You all know that our district is North St. Paul, Maplewood, and Oakdale, but we also have a section of Woodbury. This piece right here is all in Woodbury. If you think about where Woodbury Lakes Shopping Center is, all of that part of Woodbury belongs in our district, which is actually wonderful for us because there's a corporate tax base, a commercial tax base that we benefit from, and it actually takes a tax burden off of our homeowners because the more this commercial parks grow, the more these grow, the less burden is placed on our own homeowners because the same taxes are spread out over the property values that we share. So we love seeing the development in this area because it helps our homeowners. You know that we also have a little slice of Lake Elmo, we have Landfall, and we have a little slice of Pine Springs as well. So we're North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale, and some other communities as well. We have our 2 high schools, our 3 middles, and our 9 elementary schools. But we also have early childhood centers. We have 2 places where we serve early childhood centers outside of our normal elementary schools, and that's at Gladstone and Beaver Lake. At Gladstone, we offer also a lot of senior citizen programming and a lot of programming there for all kinds of community education of all ages. We also have a Harmony building that serves an alternative learning school for students with special needs. And we also, in that same building, serve adult learners, adult ESL, students who are learning English as a second language, adult learners who are working on their GED. Those are also working out of the Harmony building. And then we also have Next Step, which is a transition center. It's a high school for 18 to 21-year-olds who don't graduate on a traditional timeline. They actually stay in high school till they're 21. We have about 100 students in that school. It's right in downtown North St. Paul. So we're more than just our traditional sites. We've got a lot of other buildings as well. I always like to remind people of that because there's some amazing things happening in these other places. So we're thinking about our 622 facilities. And tonight's presentation is going to really talk about buildings. So the buildings, the facilities that we're working out of. Our goal is to really think about safe and secure environments for our students. That's our #1 goal when we plan for facilities. We want innovative learning environments. We want environments where people have comfortable spaces and there's modern spaces to work out of, flexible learning environments, healthy environments. We want our schools to be energy efficient. We are going to talk a little bit about school boundaries a little bit this evening. And we also want to make sure that our schools are providing all the services and options and programming that we want for our learners. Something we have to think about is what's the enrollment going to look like in our district? And we spend a lot of time studying this, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. We also want our entire community to take pride in our school buildings, so that's also a priority that we have. So how did this all begin? Why are we talking tonight? Well, a couple years ago, a little over 2 years ago, you may recall, we worked really hard to pass an operating referendum in our district, right? Our voters came together and supported an operating levy for our school district. And at that time, one of the promises we made was that we were going to take really, really good care with all of the tax dollars we were collecting from our community. We didn't want anything to go to waste. And so when we did that, we actually decided, you know, one place we should do is an energy audit. Let's make sure we're not losing money literally out the windows by having inefficient running buildings, energy efficient buildings. So we brought in a firm that really specializes in energy efficiency of buildings. And we started doing an audit of every single building. And they did tours, they met with staff, they looked at all the machinery, the mechanicals. They started looking at the repair history of doors, windows, roofs, things like that. And as they started that project, they really kind of uncovered a lot of other issues inside of our buildings, because once you start opening it up and looking at it, they started to see, wow, we have a lot of issues with our space utilization and how the traffic flows in these buildings. And one of the things that's interesting about building code, when schools or any building, for example, there's new codes that get put into state law all the time, and local law and city laws. And you don't actually have to bring your buildings up to code until you touch them. Once you start construction in a building, then you have to bring them up to current codes, right? So there's a lot of places where we don't meet code for quite the number of bathrooms we should have, because times have changed. But when we start looking at any kind of construction, all of a sudden, there's this whole other can of worms of things you have to think about when you're planning for buildings. And so we've been looking at the code reviews and where are we behind in those areas. So this all started as an energy audit and grew into an area where we saw a lot of needs in our buildings. One of the big things that came out during that era was that we have a shortage of space in our elementary and our high schools in particular. One of the reasons for that is that in the era when our schools were built, and by the way, almost all of our schools are over 50 years old. The two exceptions are North High School, which was built just over 20 years ago, and Skyview Community School, which was built at that same time frame. The rest are over 50 years old. Most have never had any kind of comprehensive renovation done to them. There's been a roof repair, there's been a small addition here and there, there's been some things done. But many of you, and if any of you grew up in our schools, or you went to any of our elementary schools, if you walk in them today, they look the same way they looked when you went there. Anyone here have that experience? Yeah. I see a few nods happening. They don't look dramatically different because we've not done any comprehensive renovations to them. And so with that, they were built in an era where you needed 20 classrooms, 20 teachers, and a principal's office. Now, we do school very differently. We offer all kinds of services to our learners. We offer speech and language services, special education services. We offer counseling and social work support. We have students who are new to the country and they're learning English as a second language. And when they get instruction in English, it's a small group instruction. There might be students who teachers find that they need some extra support in math, and they need a small group space to work on that, or reading skills. And what happens is, in our buildings, people have looked for all these spaces that the building wasn't designed for that. So our wonderful teachers are so creative, but they've carved out all these little spaces that really weren't meant to be there, right? And what happens is some open foyers and open spaces have been cubed up with kind of homemade furniture dividers, shelving that divides up spaces, makeshift walls that people have created. Additionally, we've given up storage spaces in some places that really aren't meant for students that we're now serving learners. And I'm going to share a few pictures with you. Some of you may have seen some of these before with regard to student space issues. If you recall, a year ago, we were trying to think, how do we handle the elementary space problems that we have? And in a way to try to do this without spending a lot of money, we came up with this idea that what if we just moved our 5th graders to middle school, since we had more room in the middle schools, and gave more space in our elementaries. It would be a pretty cost-efficient way to move the space forward and put some of the kids in the middle school. And you may recall we had about 40 community meetings about that. And there was some decent support for the idea, but there was enough people saying, I don't want my babies going to middle school when they're only in 5th grade, not a good idea. And so we listened. We listened and went, okay, I hear ya. What can we do differently then? So we're trying to think of different ways to solve our space problems. And tonight's conversation is another version, another plan that's trying to solve some of the same issues we were talking about a year ago. The pictures you're going to see tonight, a few of them you might have seen last year when we talked about these same issues, and some are probably new pictures. But the issue is still the same as we talked about it. How many of you were in those presentations a year ago when I talked about those? Yeah, a number of you were. So here's a few pictures. This is what I talked about. Schools that don't have space for small group meetings and interventions are often creating those spaces with modular furniture, with sometimes bookshelves and cabinetry, and room dividers so that they can create space where there's not space for offices, right? We also have teachers who will pull students out to a hallway and look for any little space they can gather a group of kids, and you can easily tell this is actually a reading intervention group. And obviously, they don't have enough chairs even at the table they were sitting at, but they were pulled out to a hallway to work with some students. This is a picture of a wonderful staff member who's actually using an electrical closet to serve our learners. And I appreciate her amazing effort to make it look cute and student friendly. But let's be honest, an electrical closet is not a good place to be serving our struggling learners. And this is actually a behavior intervention space to work with students who are struggling and working on some skills. And so creative staff, but we need better spaces for our staff to work with our learners. We actually, for some reason, have a lot of old shower stalls in our elementary schools. Not sure why. I haven't actually heard the answer, but I think it has to do with back in the day, our custodians would clean the buildings and then they would be able to shower on site before they went home at the end of the night. So they've all been abandoned, but we're now using them for all kinds of creative things. This is actually a social worker's office in one of our schools in an empty shower stall. Over here, this is a little closet, and right here is a shower. And it actually works. I've turned on the water. It's running water. This principal has given up his office 3 days a week so that people can actually use his own space, his office, to serve students. So when people are working with small groups of students and they need a place to go, he gets up his office. A majority of our elementary principals in our district do the same. They all give up their space because they know that there's a place that people can meet with kids, and they give them up so that people can work with students. This principal even had a phone line wired into this shower stall so that when he's working out there, he can be making phone calls with parents and things like that. Amazing staff we have here. They do wonderful work, but you can see where our facilities have just become pretty outdated and not serving what we need. We have overcrowding happening in certain sites, and it just comes down to another issue we have, and that is that we have not done boundary changes, attendance boundaries, in a very long time. School districts typically redo boundaries from time to time because population shifts happen. You have housing developments where there's more dense population in certain neighborhoods than others, and over time you need to do attendance boundary changes, and districts do that from time to time, and we have not done that in quite a while. So that also adds to our problems. We have disrepair. Many of you have been in our school buildings, and we have lots of things that haven't been replaced in many, many years. And I could show you many more pictures, but it's time to look at how we're going to upgrade our facilities and give our learners the kinds of spaces that they deserve to have. Crowded hallways. This is a picture actually taken from Tartan High School. I'm really pleased to say, if you recall in our levy referendum campaign that we did a few years ago, when we passed the new operating levy, do you recognize people? Yeah, I know. When we did that, we actually made a promise that one of the things we were going to add, so we were going to be working on, one of the pieces was safety and security. We specifically talked about upgrading our camera systems so they would be better, badge access, things like that, as well as behavior intervention. So a few years ago, we would never have been able, this was pulled right off the security camera in the school. That's how clear they are now. We didn't used to have that. In the past, we couldn't even see faces on those security cameras, and now we can. But you can see that when the bell rings in our high schools, it's really crowded. Our high schools have just reached a point where they're just really tight. They're overcrowded for the number of students they're serving. And this past year at Tartan, we actually had to convert a few computer labs to regular classroom spaces because we simply didn't have enough classroom spaces to serve the learners that we have at Tartan High School. Parking lot congestion and traffic flow is an issue all over the district, and I'm sure you're all gonna nod, right? Because in the time that our schools were built, they were not built for the busing systems that we have. In those days, kids walked to school, and you walked to your neighborhood schools. What happens now is, let me back up. In modern school design, when they build new schools, you put parking lot, bus drop off and pick up on one side of the building, parent drop off and pick up on the other side. They don't cross each other. And in our older schools, we have a mixing of those two. And it happens in many, many of our buildings. And this is a picture right here of Tartan High School. Our buses come through the same loop that parents come through to pick up kids. And so you can see the buses are trying to get in, and we have parents who are also trying to pick up their kids at the same time, and it's causing this congestion and jam up right there. Add to it a bunch of teen drivers trying to get out of the parking lot. It's just not a good recipe for success. And the sidewalk is narrow enough that kids are often standing on the ground, which at times is very snow covered, to wait for buses. And you can think about the elementary schools where your kids are at. There's often a congestion and drop off and pick up, and so that's a big part when we talk about school safety. A big concern we have is the drop off and pick up zones as well. All right, let's take a look at North High. North High is our newest building in the district. What's interesting about North High is it is still really overcrowded. Most high schools, when they're built new in our state these days, are built on 70 to 80 acres of land. North High was built on under 20 acres. So it's really landlocked and it's really in a tight space. And what happens is, this building here is our district education center, and we're about a block away from North High. What happens is, we've got some classrooms on the 3rd floor that are still being used by North High School, and kids every hour of the day are crossing between this building and their main high school. It's really inconvenient when it's really cold and freezing, but it's really awful when there's those torrential downpour rains, because they have to move between the buildings to get to class. It also poses a security risk. As we're trying to think about safe and secure buildings, having students passing out there on the street every hour of the day is just not what we want to have happening. So that's another issue that we have with North High. Why would we reinvest in facilities now? We have a unique opportunity on our horizon, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. This right here is a picture of our district's debt forecast. I know it looks like something that might take a little time to explain, but I'm going to try to put it into some easy terms, and if you have major questions about it, we can talk afterwards. But this red, this is basically the school district's debt and the forecast of our debt. The red represents debt that we incurred back in the 90s when we built North High School and Skyview Community School. And the community came together and authorized district spending so that we could build those 2 new schools. As you can see, this debt is on track to be paid off. If you think about, like, if you have a home mortgage and all of a sudden, it's different than the way normally we spend our money on home mortgages. Normally you have a 30-year fixed loan and every month's payment is the same every month for 30 years. School debt is structured very differently. Different debt pieces of the debt are sold, bonds are sold at different times, and they all have different repayment structures. But you can see the red debt, the payments that we pay are starting to come down. This right here represents a $30 million mark. That's the amount that we actually collect from taxpayers in the community for facilities debt only. Now, in the past, we've kept this debt level very flat for many years. The green represents some money it's called long-term facilities maintenance funding. The green debt is debt that we collect from taxpayers, and our school board has the authority to raise and lower the green debt every year without voter approval. It's school board approved. But green money can only be used for repairs. So it can only repair something that's broken or needs replacing. So a door for a door, a window for a window, a new roof for an existing roof, carpet for carpet. It can't put in a safe and secure addition on a building. It can't expend learning spaces. It can't do anything that's going to change the footprint of the building. It's just repairs. Now, this green that you see here is just a placeholder. We have the ability to drop that down and lower it to whatever level we want. What's happening right now is, because we've been taxing in recent years, we've been keeping the taxes flat. We have an opportunity to reinvest, borrow new facilities debt, and not raise taxes to do it. Now, our financial advisors have told us that we've got the ability right now to borrow about $250 million without raising this bar up. So the way it would happen is, when we repay the debt, you borrow it in a way that lenders structure that the first years you'd only pay a little bit of it back. You'd have small payments. Think of it as like interest-only payments. And then we'd have bigger principal payments added to it. But lenders work with school districts all the time, and they will structure your repayment structure to fit into whatever kind of repayment plan you want to have. So the long and short of it is, we have this new opportunity, because of this debt coming down, to reinvest, potentially without raising taxes at all to do it. I will say this though, we will have to go to the taxpayers to get approval to do that. Okay, so what we're talking about is adding some new red debt. And red debt has to be approved by the taxpayers. And depending on how well they feel to support our work, it would basically be a message that we would want them to continue investing at the same level they've been investing for the past decade, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense, and we can talk a little bit more about that if it doesn't make sense. But basically we have this new opportunity. Now, one of our challenges is 250 million sounds like a lot of money. The problem is, it's really not enough to do everything we want to do to all of our buildings, right? So what we're trying to figure out is what can we do with $250 million that helps us meet our goals and get every one of our learners into the kinds of environments we want them to be in. So that's why this comes down to this prioritization that we're talking about today. Couple things we're trying to think about as we plan for the future. What do the demographics of our district look like? Are we gonna grow or are we gonna shrink in enrollment? There's a couple factors here that we believe could increase our enrollment significantly. The first is that there's about 2,000 new homes planned in Oakdale. Now, the mayor recently told me that it can take up to 10 years for those homes to actually be built and inhabited by families. But they did say it's coming, it's definitely happening, it's just gonna take some time to get there. The vast majority of those 2,000 new homes are sitting right now in the attendance zone for Castle, Skyview Middle, and Tartan. So we're keeping that in mind. We also know that the northern part of Woodbury that I showed you on the map, where all the commercial parks are, they're actually looking at a new apartment complex in there that's gonna have about 253 units, and that is in our district boundaries. Finally, we've been told that there are 100 new units, up to 100 coming into North St. Paul, right off of McKnight. Originally, we heard it was gonna be 50, but now they've said it actually looks to be more like 100. So we know there's gonna be some possible population increases. We don't yet know what percentage of these housing developments might be senior living that may not have school-age children, but we're monitoring and working with the cities as the developments are being planned. So with that, all three of our core cities have said they expect an increase in school-age children coming on the horizon. Another factor that could draw away from our district enrollment is that Crosswinds Middle School is just across our border in Woodbury. It's actually now been bought. It is owned by St. Paul Public Schools. So even though it's not in St. Paul, it's actually in Woodbury, St. Paul Schools has bought it and has said they're gonna open it as a middle school, a St. Paul Public Schools middle school, 6-8 STEM school. And because this school is really close to our border, and actually for the southern part of our district, it's really a middle school that's gonna be fairly close to some of those houses. We're anticipating we may lose some students, especially middle school students, to this school. And we think that could have a dramatic impact on Maplewood Middle School, depending on how this all rolls out and how operations go with this. They are planning to open this school in next fall, in September of this year, September of 19. Finally, funding for pre-K programming. I'm not sure if you've heard, but our district is one of the top leaders in terms of pre-K programming in the metro area and really in the state. We have over 500 students in our pre-K programming here. The state has offered over the last few years under Governor Dayton a lot of opportunities for additional funding for pre-K, and we've grabbed every opportunity we can get. And so when other districts didn't meet their quota of numbers, we grabbed their numbers too. We've been building the program. But a lot of the funding that our programming is built upon is actually slated to end at the end of this school year. Now we have a new legislature in place, and we're gonna wait and see what happens with the new governor. We don't know. We're hoping that that funding will continue, but at this point, it's on the books to not continue past spring of 19. And so, while we will always and continue to offer our pre-K programming, right now we're offering it for free, largely for free across our whole district. And if we have to go back to having families pay for it, we anticipate the numbers are gonna drop, right? I mean, less people are gonna sign up for it if it's not free anymore. So we're trying to watch those numbers because these are two things that could really dip our enrollment in the very short term. You've already heard about the space challenges. I've shown you some pictures, particularly at our elementary and our high school. And obviously this unique financial opportunity that we have on our horizon right now. All right, so let me talk just a little bit about the review of phase one. Castle Elementary and Richardson Elementary are both schools where we felt like Castle was an important place to invest because all that new housing development in Oakdale is assigned to Castle. So we wanted to make sure if we're gonna invest in a couple of elementaries that we start with a couple schools we wanna draw enrollment into and create more capacity for. Richardson Elementary is actually in the northern part of our district. It borders a lot of neighboring districts, and we are losing some students from our district who are open enrolling out of our district. We're hoping we can keep them in district. But also when we look at boundary changes, we have some overcrowding at Weaver, which is right next to Richardson, and we're hoping when we redraw the boundaries, we're gonna pull some families off of Weaver onto Richardson, and we hope that it'll be more palatable to the Weaver families who have to relocate if they are assigned to a school that's just been renovated. So a couple reasons why we started with those. But these two schools are going to look very different by December of 2019, so we're excited about that. Goals for our future building renovations. So if we have $250 million and we know we want to renovate our schools, let's think about our priorities. Number one is safety. I already talked to you a little bit about school safety. One of the big factors is simply parent drop-off and pickup and bus flow. Traffic flow is really a key ingredient to school safety. And let me just remind you, the key ingredients to school safety also include knowing your students, making sure every child is connected to peers and adults, and all these social emotional connections for kids as well. All of that's important, but it's not part of what we're talking about in building design. So when I talk about the building design, I don't want you to think we're not thinking about all the human side of school safety, because that's actually a huge piece of what we're already working on. But for the purposes of building design, these are some things we're looking at. Secure entrances. Modern schools, when they design school entrances to their buildings, they don't just have badge access. They also have a double vestibule entrance. Oops. Let's switch ahead. I'll give you some pictures. A double vestibule entrance where people come from the outside, then they push a buzzer once they're inside the first door. And once they're inside that door, if the visitors are allowed into the building, they're funneled into the office where they're screened for why they're there, what they need, what their purpose is for being there. Inside that office, you have some kind of a conference room. So if somebody's just visiting to meet with someone, that person comes to the office and meets with them in that conference room. If someone is allowed into the building from the school office, there's another point where there's badge access. They don't just get to leave the office and go into the school. Someone with a badge has to let them out of the office into the rest of the building. If you think about modern hospitals, hospitals have those layers of security. You can go to certain layers, but you can't go to the next interior entrance. When you have secure zones inside of a school, you have zones where people can only get as far as they are allowed to get. So even if you ever were to have an intruder with a push button lockdown zone, doors closed, kind of like magnetic fire alarm doors, and people can't get past them unless they have badge access to get that. With a push button, we can also deactivate everyone's badge access if we think someone's stolen someone's badge or there's some kind of a compromise, because it's all on the computer system. We're looking at bullet-resistant glass, and interestingly, we're already trying to work on putting some of these in place in some of our sites already. We're kind of on a rotation, but there's a certain film that can be put over glass, and even if someone were to try to shoot through the film, it would break the glass and maybe put a hole in it, but even if they try to punch through it and bang through it, it will not shatter. They can't get into the building. So it's a wonderful layer of protection, and we've been working with 3M makes a really great film for this, and we're actually trying to work on getting some of that into our schools already. High definition cameras, you saw some examples of that. We're trying to do more with high def cameras. Cameras really help us whenever there's a concern to be able to look and see what's happening in a school or what's going on. Instant communication across all computers and displays. We've actually got a couple things happening. Right now, when our school principals are running lockdown drills or any kind of a fire drill or any kind of emergency drill, we're having them practice using their phone to alert all the staff in their building. Here's what's happening right now. This is just a drill. Or there's something going on in the neighborhood. This is an actual lockdown and here's what's happening. But they can push out information. One of the best tools in a crisis is information. If our teachers know what's happening, hey, the threat's in the gymnasium, then they know, okay, that gives me some help with my decision-making process wherever I am in the building. And so we're trying to get our whole district to practice in all of our drills, and you can talk to your teachers. They've been all trying this out and using it. We're trying to tweak the system. The second thing is a program called, we use Blackboard Messenger. If you get those messages about snow days and all that coming out to you, those come to you often through Blackboard Messenger if you're getting the text message version of the message. So we're using that. We're also working on a program called Alertus, which is getting installed in all of our schools. So if I want to put my building in lockdown, I can push out a message that will go across every screen in the district that's connected to the district Wi-Fi. So right now, this presentation I'm giving you is I'm on the district Wi-Fi because I'm pulling this off the Google slide. So right now, if there were a lockdown in this building, a message would scroll right across my presentation and all the smart boards in the classes that would give you a message, you know. Emergency drill, we're going to be doing this, so we're using that tool as well. Information is the most important thing we can be working with right now. We're looking at innovative door hardware. in the past, if you want to lock down a classroom, you have to have a key, right? And a lot of times we have teachers who, there's a substitute in the classroom, or there's a teacher who simply forgot their key at home that day, and all of a sudden, how do they lock down? Or you're in an open space, like a school media center, or you're in a bathroom, and there's not a key for you to lock that room. So innovative door hardware that helps people lock down their spaces wherever they are, even if that's not normally a place they have a key for. And obviously, I mentioned the safe drop-off and pickup zones. These are all priorities. We're trying to think about how do we put these things in place in all of our school sites and trying to make sure that we make that. So we want to kind of put ourselves on the map as a district that has some of the safest school environments, facilities. I already showed you these pictures. We're also looking at innovative learning spaces. We want modern furniture in our classrooms. If you think about your kiddos when they come home at night and they do homework, some of them sit right at the kitchen table and they sit and do their work. Many of them don't. They sit on a couch, or they lay on the floor, or they sit on their bed, because our bodies want to be in different positions during the day. And if you've been sitting in a desk all day, sometimes it's nice to be in a different kind of a position, or you want to stand up and do things. What we're trying to look at, and we've been studying the research about, how do we create classroom spaces where kids can change positions and have some options and different configurations inside their classroom spaces. We're also looking at creating like internet cafes in our high schools. Our high schools are already unbelievable in the amount of college credits we're offering our students, and the course catalogs for both Tartan and North are extremely rich. They're very competitive with our neighbors about the number of courses we offer. But as we move towards offering even more courses, we want to offer more online learning options. So let's say I'm a high school senior and I want to take a third-hour class that's online, that maybe there aren't enough students in my school to offer the class for a whole classroom full of people, but I can take it online even if there's only 5 of us who want the class. By having a space that I can go and work during the day, I can get some adult help staffing these. It's basically like redesigning our media centers so that they have flexible seating involved, that they have adults there to support independent learners and things like that, and different kinds of places and ways for people to be comfortable. If you think about a Starbucks, when you go into a Starbucks, you have your choice. You can sit at a high top table, you can sit at a comfy couch, you can sit at a low top table. There's options for you. And that's kind of what we're trying to think about in our school environments. Healthy environments. Our goal is air-conditioned schools. Long gone are the days where you can just shut down those hot and humid months of June, July, and August. Last year alone, we had 3,000 students in our summer programming. And we're already working in the summers to try to move those programs into spaces where we have some air conditioning, because some of our schools already have them. But right now, our numbers have grown so much, we don't even have enough spaces for everybody to be in an air-conditioned space in the summer. So we need to continue to expand those options for our kids. We're also talking about voice amplification systems for teachers. Think about my voice right now. When I'm a teacher, there's sometimes in our buildings we have a lot of ambient noise, and we're trying to reduce that with some of our mechanical systems as well. But if you think about an environment that's just always a little bit noisy, and if you don't have, like right now, I can speak to you in a calm, quiet voice, and it can be relaxing. If I'm a teacher who doesn't have a voice amplification system, and I have to talk at a high level all day long just to keep up with the noise, there's a layer of stress that gets added to the environment that's almost imperceivable, but it's exhausting. It's exhausting for the teacher, it's exhausting for the learners, and it reduces your ability to kind of focus on learning. So there's a lot of good research about voice amplification systems, and those aren't actually that expensive, but we believe they're important, and hardwiring some speakers into the schools would really help us do that. Increasing natural light, adjustable LED lighting. We know that some of these fluorescent lights don't work well for our learners. We have kids, a lot of teachers put like a blue fabric over their fluorescent lights to try to put a different tone in the room. We want to try, our dream is to have adjustable lighting. And indoor air quality. Right now, our school systems have these heating systems that heat from the ceiling down. They blow warm air down. Well, we all know what happens to warm air. It rises, right? So it's not a good way to keep the room evenly heated. So when you put the heat on the floor and it rises up, it's more even heating. But the modern systems also evacuate the exhaust the old air out and bring fresh air in more regularly, which also reduces the spread of cold and flu because you're not blowing the air down and circulating coughs and sneezes around the room. So these are all goals that we have. And our dream is to do this everywhere. So we're trying to figure out how do we make this all happen. Tonight I'm going to share with you phase 2 proposal. You've probably heard some rumors about it. I want to remind you This is a proposal, it's a draft, and you get to have an opinion on it. And if you recall from last year when we talked about the 5th grade idea, we listened, and we're gonna monitor and adjust. So tonight is all about your feedback and your thoughts and ideas. So here's our goal. We believe that we can try to accomplish this with that $250 million. Now, one option is we go out to our voters and try to get $400 million. We don't believe that that would pass very easily in our district because it's not easy to pass tax increases in the community, and we've learned from past lessons it's easier if we just don't have to do that. So, our goal is to renovate and expand Tartan. Tartan needs a lot more work than North does. But for North, one of the goals to North is just, in every school I'm going to mention, the goal is to put a secure entrance with that double vestibule that I showed you a picture of. But at North, it would be a double vestibule entrance with a 2nd-story addition that would put enough classrooms there that we don't have to have the kiddos walking from this building over to North, right? With Tartan, it would be involving an academic wing, ideally, that would add more space to the building as well, because they're really running tight on space as well. North is a much newer building and doesn't have as many repairs that are needed to it. Our proposal, and remember this is a draft, so don't panic. Our proposal, though, is to actually reduce from 3 middle schools to 2. What we're learning is that to renovate or build new, a secondary school is incredibly expensive. And so one of our goals is actually to take our middle schools and convert them to 2 larger middle schools. So everyone who goes to Skyview will go to Tartan. Everyone who goes to John Glenn would go to North. And you wouldn't have those kids who are split up after them, because with 3 going into 2, we always have the kids who don't get to stay together with their peers. Why would we choose Maplewood? Well, Maplewood's in the middle. We also think that having an east and a west would be more strategic for our district population. The other factor is that Maplewood Middle, simply put, is a money pit. The amount of money that our architects and construction managers have told us that it would cost to renovate Maplewood is huge, far more than these would cost. Maplewood is a school that just hasn't had really any updates to its core ever. I mean, there's so many things that are so behind for Maplewood. There's a lot of asbestos in Maplewood. Don't worry, your kids aren't breathing it. It's all sealed up and locked up. But once you start construction, and if you have it in there, you have to abate it. We've been told it could cost a couple $1 million to abate the asbestos alone that's in Maplewood. So there's just a lot of things that are going to make this school cost a lot more to renovate. Now, something I want to point out, we're also learning that if you have schools that you're renovating from top to bottom, a lot of people, where there's possibilities to do so, are looking at building a whole new building rather than trying to retrofit an old building. What we're learning is it doesn't cost a lot more to build new from the ground up than it does to retrofit and renovate an old building. We're learning that with Castle and Richardson right now. Every time you get into the project, there's more unexpected costs because you start getting deeper and deeper into the project. There's only 2 places in our district where we own enough property where we could actually build up from new. And one of those is the Maplewood Middle School site. We own a significant acreage there. The other one is the Eagle Point property, where we own significant acreage at Eagle Point. Those are the only 2 places in our district where we own enough space where we could actually build another structure on the property. So, let's talk about elementary proposal. We're actually looking at building a new Eagle Point Elementary on its existing site. It would be a bigger school to house more students. Building a new elementary school on the existing Maplewood site, and renovating and expanding Carver. With that, Skyview Elementary, currently elementary and middle are in the same building. The elementary students would move out and Skyview Middle would take the whole building over, so it would have space for all the students there. We would close Oakdale Elementary and repurpose that land because it touches Tartan. So we repurpose that land for some Tartan expansion. Now, just to be clear, Tartan's building would not encroach on the Oakdale property, but when I mentioned to you the codes that we have to think about, when you add more hard surfaces to a building, the codes require a lot more porous surfaces for stormwater management, for rain runoff. And so if you think about like all the commercial property in Woodbury, right, all those shops that have been built up over the years, you see all those ponds with fountains in them, all the geese are hanging out in. They're not there because they're pretty. They're there because code requires if you add more concrete, you have to add places where rain can store. If there's a big rain, it's got to have a place to go. And one of the things you need are lots more green spaces for the rain to go. So that's a piece of why this is included in the plan. And then Webster Elementary would close. It's one of our smallest schools. And we believe that with our bigger elementary schools, we can become more efficient by combining some of these sites. And so this is kind of the proposal that's on the table right now. We would be going from 9 elementaries to 7, because remember, we're adding a new one here. But the nice thing is, 2 of the new ones would be bigger, but they would have everything we want from the ground up. All the drop-off and pickup zones would be beautiful. Everything would be modern, mechanicals, air conditioning, and all of those things we're talking about. For the remaining sites, because there's a couple buildings involved here, several that we didn't mention, that would not be proposed for closure or changing their footprint, but we would still be looking at how do we modernize them for safety and security, modern furniture, all those innovative learning environments that we look at, and traffic flow. So we would still be considering, so like Weaver, Cowan, who maybe wouldn't be getting a change in their footprint in addition to the building, they would still have these pieces in consideration with the plan. Now, the goal is that our 2 high schools become flagship buildings where everyone goes and has a really innovative learning experience that meets the needs of all the programming. The same would be true for our middle schools. Part of the John Glenn would be that they'd get a new pool addition as well, because if we're going to close Maplewood where there's a bigger pool, we need to expand the pool that currently exists at John Glenn so that we can have 2 competitive pools in the district. Obviously, Skyview already has one, and so we need one for John Glenn. It's a big shift in thinking about things, but we believe that by having fewer buildings, we can build them more to our liking and to our standards and all the safety pieces we want, and not have to leave anyone without the updates that we want and some of the planning that we want. So it sounds like a really dramatic idea, and it is, and it's okay to have strong feelings about that. So I'm hoping you're going to think about what you like and don't like, what questions you have. I want to talk for a few minutes about school boundaries. Obviously, right here are the boundaries for North and Tartan. In the new proposal, these would become the boundaries for John Glenn and Skyview. They would just match, because students who go to John Glenn would go to North, students who go to Skyview would go to Tartan. This is our current middle school boundaries. You can see that Maplewood already has this odd divide anyway. It's kind of an interesting structure. I'm not sure how that ever happened. But Maplewood would no longer exist, and so these would just match here. With regard to the elementary sites, these boundaries would be redrawn so that the population of our students matches the enrollment, the capacity size of the buildings. You can see right here that Webster Elementary, which would close, their boundaries are completely non-touching each other. They're in random, this is what gerrymandered boundaries looks like if you're interested in that whole conversation, but this is not what boundaries should look like. Boundaries should have natural borders around school communities. They should have natural neighborhood borders and follow natural roads and landmarks and lakes and things to try to draw them. So we would have more evenly spaced boundaries. The goal, though, would be that we would have renovated schools. If you think about Richardson and Castle, and then you've got Eagle Point would be here, the new Maplewood Elementary would be here. Cowan and Weaver would both have updates to security and the traffic flow and things like that. We'd be evaluating that and new furnishings and all that. And then a small addition onto Carver so that we can house more students. Families who are currently at the Skyview and Oakdale Elementary would be reassigned to either the Maplewood Elementary, the new Eagle Point, or Carver down here, and we'd be working those boundaries to kind of match. And we've drawn versions of these boundaries to see that it works, but the boundaries would never be finalized for a little while till we actually have a little better sense of what's happening with the housing developments. Let me show you just a little bit about timeline. If all this were to happen, the changes wouldn't take place until about fall of 22 at the earliest. So students would not change schools or change boundaries until that date. So it's a little ways out there. That's why we're talking early. This school year, we're working on collecting input from our stakeholders. We're trying to float some ideas about the plan and possibly make some tweaks to the plan. That's something we're considering as well too. And we're going to be working with our school board and administration to kind of think of different versions based on the feedback we're collecting. If we decide to go out for a referendum, I'll tell you one thing. We're not going to go out to our voters if we don't feel like there's significant support among our own parents, community members, and teachers and staff in our buildings that they feel this is a good idea. If everybody thinks it's a terrible idea, there's no way we're going to go to our voters and say, hey, vote yes for this, because there's no way we're going to have that kind of support if we don't have our own internal support. That's why your voices really matter. What you think, how you feel about this really matters. the challenge we have is how do you make $250 million work for all learners? And so by starting with what do our high schools and our middle schools look like, and then how do we make sure all of our elementaries still have the safe environments and all that as well, is kind of what we're trying to go with here. People might have different opinions about that, and if you do, I want to hear them. But it's not an easy place to be. So that's why we're here to talk about stakeholder input. You have this form in front of you. Green, I like this idea. And it's okay if you have some things that are green and some things that are red, or all green and all red. This is about being honest. Yellow, I have a question. I don't understand this part of the plan, or why you decided, or why you proposed this. Remember, you've got a QR code there, so if you'd like to do the survey online, you can certainly do so. If you want to scan the QR code and save the address and fill it out at home when you have a little more time to think about it, that's perfectly okay as well.